I rise today on behalf of the thousands and thousands of men, women, and children around the world who are the victims of human trafficking. I rise in their defense on their behalf and in the interest of responsible trade policy that recognizes there can be no reward to nations who ignore the problem and do nothing to end the scourge of what amounts to modern-day slavery, one of the greatest moral challenges of our time. After negotiations with the White House, USTR, and my colleagues on the Finance Committee, Senator Wyden and I, at the appropriate time, will be introducing an amendment to the trade bill to make sure that any Tier 3 rated nation, those are the nations who have the worst records in our trafficking in person report, that any Tier 3 rated nation hoping to benefit from the Trans-Pacific Partnership will have to address the problem of human trafficking in their countries. They will have to make concrete efforts to meet the standards stipulated in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or they will not have the benefit of privileged fast-track access to our markets, period. This modification to my original amendment allows for a narrow exception, not just a waiver as we do with most of the restrictions on the executive branch. This exception may apply only to a country that has been certified by the State Department as having taken, and I quote, concrete actions to implement the principal recommendations of the Trafficking in Persons report. It will have to be made public so that all will be able to judge that the implementation of those principal recommendations, concrete actions towards them, is taking place. Now that has real meaning. Those recommendations are the roadmap we lay out for countries to move from Tier 3. It's a historic change to the nature of trade agreements now and in the future. For the first time, we will have on the Senate floor trade promotion authority that says we cannot provide fast track for a trade deal with countries that have done nothing to stem the tide of human trafficking. For the first time, we have an amendment in a major bill that would impose real consequences, real repercussions for turning a blind eye to recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining a person for compelled labor or commercial sexual acts through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. For the first time, we have given teeth to State Department's TIP report and will hold nations accountable for their inaction. And while the report has provided us with important information, it has relied on moral authority, but has no real-world impact on real-world suffering. Now, should this bill pass and be signed into law, at least we will not reward nations with the worst record on reining in human traffickers with the benefits of fast track to America's markets. Mr. President, my mother was a seamstress in northern New Jersey. No one worked harder. She came home tired, but she came home to her family and was proud of her work. She wasn't held hostage by her employers, forced to hand over her salary, her passport, or worse. Thanks to the hard work of the community of advocates against trafficking and the commitment of my colleagues on the committee, the No Fast Track for Human Traffickers Amendment is in the legislation we are debating presently on the floor. I understand there are those who would prefer to see this amendment just disappear, but just like those it protects who are suffering around the world, it will be alive in every trade agreement now and in the future. This amendment says that we will not be silenced. We will not be bowed because some want free trade at any cost, at any human cost, even if it means letting those nations that our own State Department has determined to be negligent at best in dealing with the scourge of human trafficking in their countries. This amendment speaks volumes about how we approach trade, how we approach the concept of fast-track policy. We, Congress, sets the terms that shape fast-track negotiations, not the other way around. Before any country gains access to U.S. markets, they must show that they have taken concrete steps to eliminate human trafficking, or there will be no fast track, not for Tier 3 nations at the bottom of the State Department's list. As Benjamin Franklin said, justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Well, let us be outraged and make sure this amendment remains a key element of American trade policy. I want to thank Senator Wyden, the ranking member, for helping to develop compromise language that has preserved the full intent of the amendment. And I want to thank all of the human rights and trafficking groups who have come forward, worked hard, helped draw attention to this problem, and provided a new public mechanism to hold this administration or any other administration accountable for their efforts to end human trafficking around the world, and not reward the very worst human traffickers with access to our markets. So, Mr. President, this is a victory for those fighting the scourge of human trafficking. Fast track is no longer a given, no matter how bad a nation's record is on how it deals with those who would traffic in human beings for profit. This amendment is for all those who have been subjected to sexual exploitation, forced labor, forced marriage, debt bondage, and the sale and exploitation of children around the world. It is for the world's 50 million refugees and displaced people, the largest number since World War II, many of whom are targets of traffickers. It's for the 36 million women and 5 million children around the world subjected to involuntary labor or sexual exploitation. For the victims of these crimes, the term modern slavery more starkly describes what is happening around the world, and sadly, what is happening in our own backyard too often in the nail salons in our neighborhoods. I'll continue to fight against human trafficking in all of its forms. All of us remain vigilant, constantly aware that the cost of human trafficking is not just far away across the ocean in a distant country. It's a moral crisis of international proportions that has reached our own shores, right here in our own backyard. So again, let me thank Senator Wyden for his efforts, to the 16 colleagues of the Senate Finance Committee, Democrats and Republicans alike, who voted for my amendment in the committee, and most importantly, let me thank all of the human rights groups who have worked closely with me to ensure that we do not reward nations with the worst record on addressing human trafficking with fast-track access to our markets. And let all those who are suffering around the world at the hands of human traffickers be the face of any future trade agreements. Mr. President, I have a list of groups who have worked every day to eradicate human slavery and who have supported my work on this important effort. I ask unanimous consent that this list be entered into the record at the completion of my remarks.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.